Welcome to the Dispatch for March 20th, 2025. This is a collection of weird and interesting things I found on the interwebs over the past few weeks. These things are generally related, somewhat tenuously, to my interest in pre-war cars and history. Coming up in this dispatch, 49 years of persistence pays off. The story of Russ's Model T. Gargoyle Oil, a history minute. The Lincoln Highway. A town called Rust, USA. And Mitch Taylor. You've met Russ before. He's my friend here in Paris who has been restoring a Ford Model T for a while. I say a while. He dragged the skeleton of this car out from a field in 1976. That's 49 years ago. For those of you like me who can remember 1976, my condolences. I know how you feel. The car he dragged out of the field 49 years ago was a 1923 Touring, and all that remained of it at that time was the frame, engine, and chassis. The story of this car began with his grandmother's sister, his great aunt. She was the teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in Golden Valley, a small community, too small even to be a village, in the Ontario North Country between Parry Sound and North Bay. She and her husband were driving south to visit family when their 1915 Model T threw a rod near Bracebridge. The year was 1923. Rather than pay for an expensive repair, they decided to buy a new 1923 Ford that the dealer had on the lot. It was a Canadian-made car that would have been made in Walkerville, Ontario, crated and shipped to Bracebridge by rail. After the car was well used by the family for many, many years, the motor and transmission was repurposed for an airboat and then ultimately laid to rest in the field. Airboats were popular as a DIY project in those days, but that's another story. When Russ went to recover it from the field in 1976, only the chassis and engine remained, but they managed to get the engine started even after decades in that field. Russ has kept the car and has been collecting parts for it and restoring it ever since. He really began work on it in earnest just before the pandemic. Have any of you been working on the same project for 49 or more years? Incredible. But Russ didn't receive any ownership papers, commonly called title, when he pulled the car from the field 49 years ago. He's been working on it and hoping, assuming, wishing that he'd someday be able to register it. While it was still a pile of parts in 2021, he went to the license office to get a new title. He had an affidavit, ownership history, serial number, appraisal, everything you should need. But they wouldn't title it because their rules required that it be complete, assembled, and running. Rather than waiting until it's completely finished, Russ decided to try to get the title again this past week. The idea was to get the title now while the appraised value is low, thereby reducing the taxes owing. Here in Ontario, when you buy a used car or create a new car through this title registration process, sales taxes must be paid on the fair market value. So Russ threw it together with whatever parts he had in any state of restoration to make it complete and running. Even though it is still very much a work in progress, he thought he'd give it a go and try and get the title. So with a new affidavit, history, serial number, and appraisal, he marched back to the license office. Do you think they would issue him a title this time around? Nope. They wanted to see a VIN on the frame. But cars didn't start with the current VIN number scheme until the 80s, and the Model Ts didn't have serial numbers on the frame until 1926. What now? How would he convince the license office that the only thing similar to a VIN on a 1923 Ford Model T is a serial number stamped on the engine? Russ was instructed to get a letter from a Ford dealer on Ford letterhead explaining the realities of serial numbers as the VIN on ancient Fords. The sales office was no help. Their service department staff were like deer in the headlights. But the parts manager was a classic Mustang collector and was willing to help. I can hear you screaming. But what if you were trying to register a Hutmobile or some other ancient brand that no longer has a dealer network? What would you do then? I have no idea. Isn't bureaucracy great? With the Ford letter in hand, Russ returned to the license office and, well, you guessed it, no dice. They were satisfied with the letter, but the computer would not accept the 7-digit serial number as of in. Continued insistence and persistent patience led to a phone call to the license office supervisory center, and with some overrides or some other computer magical incantations, an exception was made, and finally, after 49 years, Russ got title. He finally now, after nearly 5 decades, owns the car. Russ, if you're watching, congratulations. That's perseverance. I tip my cap to you, sir. Well done. There are some automotive memorabilia that are just so curious. Take, for example, this logo from the Vacuum Oil Company, featuring their Gargoyle logo. The company was founded in 1896 in Rochester, New York. The Vacuum Oil Company's name derives from the process of vacuum distillation, used to separate individual compounds out of liquid solutions for their petroleum refining. This process was discovered accidentally while attempting to distill kerosene. The residue from this process was found to have good lubrication properties. The distinctive Gargoyle logo design came to adorn many oil cans, barrels, signs, and even factory walls. In 1931, the company merged with the Standard Oil Company of New York, forming what would later become Mobil. While the Gargoyle remained a recognizable symbol for years, the company eventually shifted its branding to the now famous Mobil Pegasus. For antique car enthusiasts and collectors, spotting a Gargoyle branded item is like finding a hidden piece of history. The trademark is dead and abandoned. I've reproduced this logo as a sticker or t-shirt in the Flivver Channel store. I did a bunch of digital restoration on it to make it look like new. Tom, who posts under the moniker Dolly's Dad on the Model T Ford Club of America forum, frequently posts collections of photos of the Model T era. I have no idea where he finds them. Here are some that he recently posted. Here is a dapper gentleman in a bowler hat. An early Coca-Cola truck. I love this downtown street parking photo, although I don't know the town nor the date. Maybe you guys can help me out with that. Two things I noticed here. The ropes or chains on the rear tires for traction in the mud. See, viewers? Ropes and chains are not just for wintertime. The interesting tailgate notches in the wooden truck bed. It looks like an early do-it-yourself Model T pickup conversion. What do you think those semicircular notches were for? He must need them to hold something in place while driving. Clearly, they were purposefully made. Let me know in the comments or on Facebook if you have any ideas. These cars are all lined up, and each has a big number on the windshield. Think it was for a car rally? Surely they wouldn't need numbers for their car order in a parade or something like that. I don't know. Once again, I don't know the date nor place this photograph was taken. And how about this tank tread plowing conversion? Wayne Sheldon provided some detailed observations about this shiny touring car.
That is a wonderful photo of that 1915 touring car. It clearly shows the brass-trimmed lamps. Black trimming of the lamps began in July of 1915, late 1915 model year, although some car continued to get the brass trimming though August and maybe even into September. Very few cars would have been leaving the factory with brass-trimmed lamps after July. The electric horn button on the steering column also had a long switchover time where both earlier and later were being produced. The electric horn was being used on the enclosed body cars, center-door sedans, and folding-top couplets, beginning in the fall of 1914. However, open-body cars did not begin receiving the electric horn until around April of 1915. However, many of the open-body TS continued to get the earlier type bulb horns through June of 1915, with a few still being produced at least well into August. So, while there were 5 months during which the early-style lamps and later-style horn could have both been on a given Model T, the likelihood is that such a car would have left the factory in June or early July of 1915.
This photo is identified as along the Lincoln Highway. The Lincoln Highway was one of the first transcontinental roads. It was cobbled together from a string of other highways and roads and tracks and stitched together to loosely form the Lincoln Highway in 1913. It's actually a really interesting piece of history, full of neat stories. I remember reading that local entrepreneurs, say that had a hotel near the route but were not actually on the highway, would simply make themselves some Lincoln Highway signs and stake them on the road to their hotel. Remove the original signs and voila! The Lincoln Highway now ran directly through their town and past their hotel. It's genius. I hope to, someday when I have some more time, do a detailed long-form video on the Lincoln Highway on Flivver Channel. I'm fascinated with its history. And a little shameless self-promotion here. The Flivver Channel store has some Lincoln Highway merch. Check it out if you're interested in that kind of thing. To wrap up this segment on the Dolly's Dad photos, let's return full circle to where we began, the town of Rust. This old photo that appears to be taken in a town called Rust in the USA prompted Dennis Chan to do some research.
It may be a photo of El Cerrito. The town of El Cerrito, California, was originally named Rust after the postmaster, Wilhelm F. Rust. The city's name was changed in 1916. It's located across the bay from San Francisco. That section of roadway may have been part of the Lincoln Highway realignment and is now part of San Pablo Avenue, possibly near where Fairmont Avenue intersects it, since that's where the original post office was and where a historical placard exists. The realignment occurred after the Carquinez Bridge was built in the 1920s, and the Lincoln Highway was diverted from going through Hayward to the south of the ferry boat landing in Oakland, instead through Vallejo to the north. Edsel Ford would have gone through Hayward on his way through to the 1915 Pan Pacific Fair. However, Horatio Jackson in his Winton would have traveled this section shown in the photo during his transcontinental trek in 1903. As an additional piece of trivia, the El Cerrito Library was mentioned in the Star Trek book The Kobayashi Maru. It was where a young Captain-to-be Kirk goes to find a solution to Starfleet Academy's unwinnable test. I just noticed another clue. In the photo, there's a sign mentioning the county line. South of Fairmont Avenue toward the border of El Cerrito and Albany used to be a laundry called the County Line Cleaners. A Japanese-American family ran it for many years. It's where Contra Costa County meets Alameda County.
As I mentioned, these photos were posted on the MTFCA forum by Dolly's Dad. He posts lots of these terrific old photos. If you're into this, like I am, just go to the forum site and search for Dolly's Dad, and you'll find lots of photos to study. One of his recent photos caught my interest. It shows a belt looped over the front axle of a Model T. I've seen these before in old photos, so I decided to ask the fountain of knowledge that is the Forum Trust of the Model T Ford Club of America. I posted about this, and here is the thread. This photo was shared by Dolly's Dad in Friday Flicks. It shows a belt around the front axle. I've seen this in other old photos too. I presume it's some sort of top-out limiter. Can anyone shed light on this? Was a belt used on the rear axle similarly or only on the front?
Yes, these leather straps help to control rebound of the transverse springs. Many type made, some straps only, some with spring assist, ESP for the Ford.
I run them on my 1924 front and rear. I made them from heavy leather belts I bought at Walmart. They do help to reduce rebound on bumps. Good to know Walmart has Model T parts. I guess if somebody wanted to get a copy of the belts made, a good saddle shop could make them. Always learning something about the aftermarket parts that were made for early cars and especially Model Ts. They are probably something Ford didn't offer from the Ford parts store.
So this makes sense. I've got to make a set to try. Super curious how these affect handling. And by the way, if you're familiar with snowmobiles, these might look familiar to you. Snowmobiles with slider suspension use a very similar top-out limiting strap. Over on Facebook, Gary Anderson posted about the Sambo self-starter. This fascinating contraption lets you put a pull start on your Model T like you would on a lawnmower or snowmobile. A cord wraps around the helical-shaped pulley and is routed back to the dash, so you can just pull start the car without getting out. I wonder how hard you need to yank on that handle. I suppose the helical shape of the pulley is meant to provide some mechanical advantage to make pulling easier. If anyone can direct me to a video to see one of these in action, or connect me with the owner of one, I'd love to know more. The post prompted Nicholas to comment with a quote directly from the literature. The only man who will have trouble with our starter is the man who is mechanically inclined. He will see how it operates and toss away this book of instruction. The manufacturer has anticipated the know-it-all types, like me, who are loath to read the instructions before trying to install something. I soon learn to regret it, but that never stops me from racing ahead, hell-bent for the leather, only to realize that I really should have just read the instructions first. It is also pertinent that the quote says the only man, thereby implying that women will have no trouble with the starter. Probably true. Over on the YouTubes, I see that Mitch Taylor has posted a video covering the installation of new wooden Model T coils and a new roller timer on his touring car. Mitch filmed this video on a very hot summer day in February and was drenched by the end of it. Gotta admire his dedication. For those of you who are not familiar with Mitch, he's in Australia and produces must-see videos for Model T beginners and aficionados alike. Check out his latest video or his full channel. Links are in the description. I did a long-form interview with Mitch a while ago. I'll put a link in the description if you want to see us chatting about Model Ts from opposite sides of the globe. And if you think that the Earth is flat and that Australia isn't real, well, I really can't help you. Do you like travelogues with a pre-war car theme? Over on JWilliams' channel, you can see his excellent account of his drive from Ohio to Michigan for the Old Car Festival. He took along Hazel, the Model T, and Eleanor, the Model A. It's a fun account of the journey. Some things to look forward to in the coming weeks. The Hooligans and I are hosting our regular first Thursday of the month live stream on April 3rd, and I've already started work on my next dispatch. spring is coming, so I hope to do some more drives in my Model T live. Yep, more Drive Live streams are coming, where I stream while driving my Model T. A viewer suggested I mount a camera to show my footwork while driving, so I'll try that. If you haven't seen the edited version of my Winter Drive Live, check it out. After I complete the driving live streams, I edit the footage and include other camera angles and synced sound from other microphones on the car. I'll put a link in the description. Be sure to check out the Flivver Channel store at flivverchannel.com. I'll put a link in the description too. In addition to the cool stuff you can buy, there's a donate button. Please consider parting with a few bucks to help keep gas in my tank and wind in my tires. Every contribution is appreciated. Winter is coming to a close, and the March melt has already begun. Those of us who enjoy driving old cars are looking forward to spring drives, car shows, and tours. But as an homage to the winter we just had, let me share with you this brief blast through the snow that I enjoyed this past weekend. It was the last weekend of true, pristine, white winter that we will enjoy this season. This footage is from the Ontario North Country, far off the beaten path. Enjoy driving over the snow with me. This is Stephen from Flivver Channel signing off. Good night.